Over the next 30 minutes, I want to show you some ways on how AppDynamics can help you with that cloud adoption. And we'll spend a chunk of, you can ask some questions afterwards, and then I'll leave you for lunch. Just around the notice, you've probably seen this a couple of times now. On the agenda, what we want to cover is, so what's the framework, what are the different types of people, and what are the different ways of going to the cloud, and what are actually, why should we even think about going to the cloud. One enabling technology in the past few years has been the whole containerization, automation, which is in place. So this is obviously one chunk of the session, and also one of our biggest partners on the whole cloud journey is AWS. So I will give you some insight on what we're doing with AWS, and then we're going to summarize it. So thinking about what are the key drivers for a cloud adoption? Speed, scale, efficiency. Simple. So on speed, it's really the speed of how fast you can get new infrastructure, new resources, new services up and running in the cloud is just amazing. It's a click, you get it, you can use it, and it scales automatically for you, right? And this is to a high level of automation, so you don't have to, let's say, have everything in your data center, spin it up, leave it there. If it's not even used, you can just use the flexibility of a provider who does nothing else but this. A couple of years back, I was in a meeting with the CIO of a German company, a big one, who actually said, Mr. Englert, for us in our data center, every server is a piece of art, which is some way you can look at it, but that way you sacrifice the speed and agility with service if you treat everything as a piece of art. So scaling out is another thing, the elasticity, which is in the name of AWS, in every service they provide is one big thing. So it just dynamically scales up and down, and it includes some efficiency out of those speed and scale advantages you get there. So it's obviously, it makes sense to do it. And if you look at the numbers, if you look out at the IDCs of the world, RightScale and a couple of other analysts, essentially everybody is doing it currently or is thinking about doing it in the future, right? So the numbers are speaking for itself. So it's across the board, everybody looks at how can we adopt cloud services, how can we move our compute to people who actually know what they are doing in terms of their data center, providing this as a service, and I can focus on my business, right? Let's do a quick poll here. So who is actually currently already using AWS? I thought so. It's a much bigger number than when I did this poll in Germany. Azure, a couple similar hands. Private cloud offerings, OpenStack or the likes. Less, interesting, okay. Essentially, hybrid or multi-cloud is already answered because you guys, some of you showed their hands twice to AWS and Azure. And others like Google Cloud Platform or IBM, no show of hands. So I would say roughly 60 to 70% of the room already use cloud services or plan to use them in the future, right? So it's something which really makes sense and drives the market. So if we look at the different people there and how they adopt cloud. So we have, let's say, from our classical monolithic on-premise infrastructure up until the optimizers who really think about tearing their whole application apart, doing every transaction, every function, providing this as a microservice. We have all the way there, and we will go through them one by one. So we have monolithic on-premise, 2 releases per year, hard cut, introducing 500 new features, failing with 300 of them, and you got the microservice type of users who optimize their whole application, tore it into microservices, and release a couple of times per day. So, and between, you got your pragmatists and transformationalists, right? So we will go through them, and just to iterate on what actually is. So we already saw that Everybody in the room is essentially using cloud service or is planning to use it. But what's the actual value of it? It's if you can really focus on your business needs, you can really focus on not standing up a whole data center, but only buying the services as you need them and as you scale. You can drive down the IT cost very significantly. So by 77%, like in this IDC-based analysis. The time is always in favor of cloud services. Their automation framework gives you really the speed to just request some database services from Amazon and to get going in a couple of minutes. And due to these facts that we reduce costs and we also increase the speed, we can really focus more on driving value. So putting out new functionalities, putting out new features more regularly, and doing stuff for your customers and driving the revenue growth with that by 10%. So that's the value you can get out of an adoption to the cloud. But if you don't want to do it, then you're in the traditionalist section, right? And we will always have those people. We will always have those applications who just don't fit in a cloud world. This can be due to various reasons. One thing is control, right? There is only so much flexibility you can get from a cloud provider. So if you say, okay, I want to just run on GPUs which direct attached SSDs because I have a very special application, you will have trouble to find this from a public cloud provider if you have special needs and if you tailor your hardware, for example, or you have to tailor your hardware. Or you want to have an application, you have to have an application that runs on mainframe. Also something which you struggle with the cloud provider because you don't have that much control over how the cloud provider provisions your infrastructure services or your platform services. Cost is another argument for some reason to not go into the cloud. So if you say, okay, I bought or I stood up a whole new data center 3 years ago, that's not paid yet, right? So I really have to use what I've bought already. And we can think about it in a couple of years' time. But first, I need to use the stuff I stood up on my premises. And the other thing is, AJ, if you've been in the session before around our mobile and IoT part, one part of it was GDPR. So compliance is a big thing as well. Some data is just simply not allowed to leave a company's premises. So this could also be an argument to stay for an application in a traditionalist way, leave it on premises, not allowed to move in the cloud. But if you can, you should use it and you should get the value out of a cloud provider. And the easiest way you can think about it is the so-called lift and shift model. So you take your infrastructure services or your application, which runs on a VM in your data center, and you transfer it over to the cloud. Get an EC2 instance, get an instance from Azure, and stand up your application there, lift and shift. If you do that, because an application is usually, and if you saw the one or the other flow map today already, you know that there are some interdependencies, right? So what you need to understand first before you can do lift and shift is, what is the order I need to take? I need to know how my application looks like. And the current way of doing things is just that you get this information on how an application is constructed. You get it out of tribal knowledge. You get it out of several CMDBs, for example. Get it from different sources, which could be information from the network guys, could be information from infrastructure, could be all over the place, right? But you don't necessarily have a central and accurate repository. So I worked for a company a while back which made their money with CMDBs, for example. And it was always a challenge to get them as accurate as possible. So one story I had there is I was with the guy who said, okay, we don't have really a CMDB. We actually go every two times a year. We get some students. We give each of them a clipboard, and we let them run to the data center and just see what's there. This worked in a very traditional IT, where there was a sticker on the server saying, this is an SAP system that worked, right? But if you're thinking about virtualization, if you're thinking about containerization, it does not work anymore. So this is just out of date. So this is something where AppDynamics can help you, right? So the flow map representation really shows you automatically what are your communications of the different application components, what are your third-party providers, what are your business transactions, which will give you an accurate plan on what do I need to move, in which order do I need to move it. Do I lift and shift everything at once, or do I start with certain services? So this really gives you a way of planning your migration out and adopting a cloud service with confidence and moving one by one, moving in one big go. Whatever you decide, we can help you there. Another thing is, if you're planning around, okay, what do I need? Do I need X4 large type instances for AWS? What type of hardware do I need? You can simply look at your infrastructure and do a very pragmatic lift and shift. Okay, I have 4 CPUs here. I need 4 CPUs in AWS. But a CPU is not a CPU, so we all know that. Memory does not equal memory. Storage does not equal storage. So we need to really know what are the hard facts in terms of amount on CPU usage I need, what are the different CPU types I use, and to plan that accordingly. And there, with all our resource metrics, with our baselines, where you see what do I use in peak scenarios, what do I use on a regular basis, we can help you also plan according to get the infrastructure size right in the cloud infrastructure. And the most important of all things is, once you migrate it, you want to know, was it successful or not? So this dashboard shows you really a pre and post cloud migration path where you see, okay, I have an application consisting of different critical business steps from login to processing a trade. And I know how many people go from step 1 to step 5 processing a trade. Did this one improve by migrating over to AWS or Azure, or did it drop? And when it dropped, where did it drop? So really to give you a single pane of glass and a transparent view on how your cloud migration worked, even with business data, to not only look at simply how many users was I able to get from login to process trade, but also how many trades did I process? How many money did I make, right? Third type, by far the most interesting type from my perspective, because it's the stage where I would say most customers are currently. Replatforming. And just to, let's say, get another poll here. Who is using Kubernetes right now? Or thinking about it. That's also fine. Okay, more hands there. Managed Kubernetes, so not the plain one, where you need to plumb everything yourself, but it's provided by ECS or AKS, EKS or AKS. Okay, not so much. They only introduced it very recently. Pivotal Cloud Foundry, OpenShift, anyone? Okay, less than I expected. And others, like plain Docker, Mesosphere, Swarm, Rancher. Okay, a couple of them. So, couple show of hands there. This is really one major shift in the industry we see. So containers have been introduced since a while. So we moved the new virtualization as a container. And now how to automate it. So Kubernetes really made its way to a new standard in the industry. Every cloud provider is picking it up. Even Pivotal, who was, let's say, the front runner in terms of how to provide a good platform as a service solution, picked up on Kubernetes recently, or not so recently. It's also reflected by the numbers. So it's one of the biggest star GitHub repositories out there. It has had a big community. It gets a lot of support and a lot of traction in the market, the whole Kubernetes thing. And but the challenges are, again, now I have an automation framework to orchestrate all my containers. It has a built-in monitoring. You can use Influx. You can use Prometheus as metric stores. But you have very many different moving parts in it. So did my Kubernetes scheduler find the right resource? what happens if it couldn't find the right resource? You have a lot of single standing metrics and information which is all over the place. So that's one challenge you have with this type of setup currently. And so essentially what Kubernetes has, it gets all your requests. You say, okay, I want to deploy a new application, and it chooses where to find its resources, right? So you have a certain set of compute power, a certain set of storage, and it moves and shifts your application around, scales it based on your rule sets you have, and does everything by itself based on a certain set of rules. So great technology, which you can, let's say, use today, and which is adopted very widely in the market currently. So how can AppDynamics help with that? For us, Kubernetes is, let's say, we support containers since a while. Since over a year, you have not only your flow map, and you see how the components talk to each other, but you can also see on which containers are they running, and under the containers on which infrastructure is it running, to give you the full context. What we introduced recently for the Kubernetes side of the house is to not only give you, okay, this runs on that container, but to also say what tags and labels are used. So all context information you can get out of Kubernetes, in which namespace it is running, which replicas are used, what version it is used. You get this type of information within AppDynamics as well to really understand how your cluster is put together. Which gives us another flexibility. So think about this: you have a certain application, and you have you do a canary release. Canary release means I have a certain feature, version 2. I want to put that out to a certain amount of users. Great. And if it works, going to adopt it to the whole user base. If not, going to revert it back. So what the tagged metrics give you really is a view of how is a certain version, for example, performing. So you can use the tags and labels you got in AppDynamics to filter your metrics by it. That means here you got average response time of version 1 and our canary release version 2. And you see that version 2 goes up and really has a bad response time, bad user experience, so I revert it back. I see that immediately, and I can also integrate that with our alarming mechanisms to really do automated actioning based on the metrics I get into AppDynamics. So the whole approach we're taking here is really, we want to give you a unified view. And that unified view, it started years ago with Java monitoring. We extended it to the end user side of the house. You saw AJ before, maybe. We extended it to databases, infrastructure monitoring. We put another level inside it, which was the Docker visibility. We put in the Kubernetes visibility by understanding the tags and labels used there. We also put automatic tags and labels in for AWS. So if you deploy on an EC2 instance, you will immediately see what type of infrastructure you use, in which region that infrastructure is deployed. So you have all these information at your fingertips. And we're going to extend it more and more. So if you have time this afternoon, there's a session by Jonah who is giving you a view on what's next with AppDynamics in terms of agents. And I think it's without saying that really 2018 will be the year with the most new functionality, most new agents within AppDynamics. And another challenge when you look at the different cloud providers is they all give you a different level of access. You have different ways of rolling out the technology. Some people give you root access, but if you're running on a platform as a service, as Cloud Foundry, for example, you don't have access to the underlying infrastructure, maybe. So it all varies. So this also affects on how we can roll out agent technology. And where we picked up recently is that we want to give you more and more best practices around how you can deploy agents. On AWS, you got official docs for Elastic Beanstalk. We got official container images where you can build your applications up on the Docker store. We have lots of documentation around deployment on Azure infrastructure. We are part of the build packs with Cloud Foundry, and this is ever expanding. So we're gonna do a lot more stuff on OpenShift next on certifying our technology. So this is really an ongoing effort where we want to give you best practices and give you, let's say, documentation at hand on how to get the technology up and running. All right, last but not least, I said it already, so basically every cloud provider, every platform provider varies in the level of access you have. So what we always try is to give you all that visibility from an infrastructure perspective, network, container, application, end user perspective with the least amount of privileges we can. So obviously we need to get the data somehow, but we try to do it with the less privileges which are out there. Let's get to our last persona, the optimizer, really tearing your whole application apart, doing a microservice-based architecture. There you will have, let's say, more or less the same challenges today, because applications are already spread out. They have complex dependencies between the components. But if you now do a microservice architecture, it is maybe 10x, maybe 20x of the services you have currently. So a flow map becomes much more complex. Dependencies become much more complex between the different components. And again, I'll reference to the session this afternoon on the roadmap, because Jonah will give you a sneak peek in what we are planning on really improving our automatic root cause analysis, which, let's say, builds upon the basis we have right now. We have baselines for every metric. So if some component downstream has problems with some resource shortage, you will see that. You will get an alarm for it, and you will be able to action on it. With that baselines, we'll be able to let's say, avoid these alarm storms, to give you only those alarms you really need to look at, really need to care about. And to pinpoint you where the problem happened. So if it's a code problem, or if it's a third-party service problem, we'll be able to provide you the visibility into that with, let's say, the least amount of work you can think of here. And that also applies to every, let's say, container technology, every automation technology, if it's Kubernetes or anything else around. And as I said, if the problem happens downstream, let's say you have a database downstream which has some problems, or you have disk space problems, you will get those alarms based on our baselining mechanisms, and not be able, you don't have to, let's say, set static thresholds for each and every metric in such a growing complex infrastructure where you tore everything apart and have microservices all over the place, because that's something you can't do anymore. All right, and all of that, as referenced before, we want to give you inside one platform. So all that information around your cloud infrastructure, around your containers, around your applications, your end users, within one single pane of glass within AppDynamics. And within that one single pane of glass, if we come back to the flow map example before, so you do, for example, such a lift and shift migration to the cloud. I want to give you one example for what we do with AWS. So with AWS, we are partnering in terms of how to do that lift and shift. So how to support during a cloud migration. And this is one specific customer example where we supported within a cloud migration within different apps. And they did a comparison for apps they did before without AppDynamics and apps that they did afterwards with AppDynamics. And the main difference you see here during the planning phase, again, if you think about the transparency a flow map can give you to see how your communication flows are, how your application is constructed and depends on each of the components, that gives you advantage in the planning phase. And if you plan right, you not only plan faster, but you plan better. And if you plan better, the time you spend during testing also significantly decreases. So overall, we'll be able to give you really an advantage in terms of time reduction during such cloud migrations. And again, we're partnering there with AWS, and also with AWS, just to give you a sneak peek, it's kind of the same story for Azure as well. So if you want to have monitoring for platform services, we got a wide range of different extensions and supported technologies on those platforms. So even if you want to monitor stuff where you can't put directly an agent on, we will work with the cloud provider to get metrics from their APIs, if it's CloudWatch for AWS, or if it's the Azure Monitor for Azure or some other technology, we'll be able to get those metrics, consume those, put baselines on them, alert you if something goes out of hand. With that, we went through all of those different personas that try to move to the cloud or that try to stay away from it, right? The point here is really that it's not really come to an end, because let's say what happens in a couple of years. The only thing we can do here is we want to give you the most amount of flexibility and the most amount of visibility on your cloud infrastructure, on your on-premise infrastructure, on your applications running on those different providers that we possibly can, right? And let's say we have to see what comes. Some of stuff already has arrived, so I'm going to end with a famous quote of the inventor of the word cyberspace. Future has already arrived. It's not just evenly distributed yet. So let's see what happens next. I can just say AppDynamics tries to keep up with everything out in the market and with everything that's up and coming next in the IT world.